Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another Library Adventures Live on such a beautiful day. I can't believe myself, it's actually sunshiny outside and nice and warm. We had a special LAL on Thursday with Yu Rong, who talked about her book, Shu Lin's Grandpa, and it was so interesting to learn about Chinese painting. If you missed it, you can actually catch up on our website. If you just go to www.kirkleyslibraries.co.uk/lal, and if you missed any other previous lals, you can catch up on those as well on there. Now today I have with me a very special author who's written an amazing book that I have with me here. Just like Grandpa Jazz, we seem to have a grandpa theme going on at the moment. Um, She's written this picture book, and it's a story about a little boy who is fascinated by the stories of his grandpa and his life pre-migration. It's an absolutely amazing book just to talk about big themes such as racism and migration, but little themes as well to find joys in the little things. I'm just going to bring Tara on now. Hi,
Thanks, Ambreen. Hello. Hi, everybody.
it's so lovely to have you here today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be part of your grandpa theme. That's amazing that there seems to be so many intergenerational stories about at the moment, which I just love. So I'm so pleased to be part of it, and thank you for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Um, it's a picture book that you've obviously recently written. I've actually read this to my little one, and it resonated with me quite a bit. So if you just want to talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, my name's Tara, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you today. And when I was at school, I really wanted to be an author. So I'm really hoping that our discussion today can inspire you a little bit to do some of your own creative writing and start creating some stories. So a little bit later on, we'll be doing some writing and drawing, whichever you prefer. To remember that it takes two people to make a picture book, obviously the author, but also the illustrator. And I'm very lucky that Just Like Grandpa Jazz has been illustrated by a very talented lady, Myrna Imamovich, and I'll be showing you some of her illustrations in a moment. So you'll need to get some pens and pencils and paper ready for our activity a little bit later on. And yeah, in a moment, I'll be reading my book, which is called Just Like Grandpa Jazz. As Ambreen has said, it's about a little boy and his lovely grandpa, and they are just the best of friends. They look a little bit different. So, in many ways, the world sees them differently, but they're just the same. Um, and this book is also about storytelling. So I've talked to you a little bit about how I always wanted to be an author and I love telling stories. But you'll soon discover that Grandpa Jazz, and not all of his stories are true. So I wonder when you're listening to me read the book, whether you could maybe think about which of those stories are true and which are made up. And there's a little clue in some of the illustrations if you can spot that. Um, so I'm here with my hat on. As Ambreen says, it's a lovely sunny day, and I thought I would get into the holiday spirit because Grandpa Jazz is going on a journey. So I will prepare to read to you. Thank you for listening. We're going to bring up the book on screen, and you'll be able to see. There we go. So Just Like Grandpa Jazz. I'm Frank, and I love stories, just like my Grandpa Jazz. He has lots of stories to tell. He's a master storyteller. Mum says that some of his stories are made up and some of his stories are true. Today, we're taking Grandpa Jazz to the airport. He's visiting the tropical island where he was born and grew up. It's very far away. Grandpa Jazz pulls an old blue suitcase down from the top of the wardrobe. Come and help me pack, Frank. I open the suitcase as he looks for his clothes. and I pull out a small rough rock with lots of tiny holes in it. What's this, Grandpa Jazz? That's volcanic rock. You see, the island where I'm from is a volcanic island. All the volcanoes are extinct, so they don't erupt anymore. He explains that as a boy, he loved exploring volcano craters, all overgrown with wet leafy forests and hidden waterfalls. Once, he tripped and fell, way, way down, rolling through the vines until he reached the very bottom. He even caught a glimpse of the heart of the earth through cracks in a rock. I unzip a pocket in the side of the suitcase. Inside is a doctor's stethoscope. Grandpa Jazz grins. That belonged to the French doctor our family once worked for. When he retired and went to live by the seaside, he gave it to me. Maybe he thought I'd be a doctor one day. Can you guess what he kept in his office? What? I ask. A human skull, whispers Grandpa Jazz. Really? I gasp. A model skull? Mum smiles, popping her head around the door. Anyway, 15 minutes before we leave, you two. Hurry up and finish packing. Here you go. Grandpa Jazz throws a pile of clothes at me, and into the suitcase they go. Toothbrush, hairbrush, aftershave. 1, 2, 3, they come whizzing at my head. And soap. Good catch. Did you know? When I was a baby, your great-grandma used to wash our clothes with soap in a river. Our dog Mickey would guard me, and if anyone came near, he barked like he was shouting, "Back off!" The suitcase is nearly packed, but one shirt is poking out, and there's a small plastic badge on it. It says, Jazz. I won't need this, laughs Grandpa Jazz. I'm retired now, but I first wore this uniform when Her Majesty the Queen invited me to work in the NHS here in the United Kingdom. Really? I ask. The Queen? How did you get here? Oh, I came on a ship like a lot of other people. We'd all been asked to come and do important jobs. He tells me that on the ship, he had to go through different doors and use different toilets and sleep in different cabins and eat in different dining rooms just because of the colour of his skin. Everyone on that ship had different skin colours, but that didn't matter. It only mattered if you were white or not white. I feel sad. If I'd have been with him on that ship, we wouldn't have been together. Right then, are we all ready? Mum jingles the car keys. It's time to go. Hopefully, I won't miss Grandpa Jazz and all his stories too much when he's away. Grandpa Jazz gets in the back with me, and Mum looks at us in the mirror. You two are just the same, she laughs. It starts to rain as we get onto the motorway. Where I'm from, Frank, says Grandpa Jazz, giant snails come out when it rains. They leave silvery trails as big as tire tracks. Then he leans over and tells me something I never knew. My real name is Jasudra, but the people I worked with couldn't say my name properly, so they decided to call me Jazz, and that's what I've been called ever since. As we unload the car at the airport, Mum looks at me and smiles. Inside the boot there are 2 suitcases. Grandpa Jazz's old blue one and a small one I haven't seen before. As we drop Grandpa Jazz to the gate, he puts his hands on my shoulders. Frank, how would you like to create a few stories of your own? And in the next page, hopefully you can see the plane is landing on the tropical island. And in the window of the plane, you can see Grandpa Jazz and Frank. And he's gone off on holiday with his grandpa. I'm Frank, and I love creating stories, just like my Grandpa Jazz. And that's the end. Thank you very much for listening. I really enjoyed reading that to you, and I hope you enjoyed listening.
That was amazing. I could read
Thank
this
you.
so many times and just not get tired of it.
Oh, that's so lovely. Thank you, and I'm really glad to hear the story as well. Um, I've got two young boys actually. So I've got two little boys, and this story you might be interested to know is actually based on some people in my family. So my dad is the real Grandpa Jazz. And lots of the stories that I heard from him growing up, I've put in this book. So I've been really excited to read this to my children, because it's all about their heritage and where their granddad came from, which has really been brought to life in the story. So it's really wonderful to know that other children are enjoying the story as well.
I think it's so important for our self-identity to be in touch with our heritage and culture. So it's such a nice way of putting that across because I have a little boy as well. And for me, I'm Grandpa Jazz because I emigrated here, and it's such a easy way to put that point across to children without complicating it, just so they can understand that obviously there's different places that people come from, and they do have a heritage that goes back quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with every generation, you can kind of get further and further away from that as people kind of assimilate into the life of the country they've come to. Um, so, and also my children don't really look very mixed race like I do. So I do wonder, like when they grow up, will they feel less of a connection to their Mauritian heritage? So my dad's from Mauritius, than I do. Um, I don't know if that matters or whether it'll matter to them, but it was certainly important to me to make sure that they understood, what is in their heritage, where they're from. The fact that their granddad came here on a boat, how he came here. He came here, and it took a month on that boat. And there's loads of stories. There's loads more stories as well. So hopefully there'll be a second installment, and we can learn more about Frank and Jazz's exciting adventures.
I think it's a great start. Now I know that you wanted to do a small activity. Do you want to start that now or?
Yes, thank you. Well, first, what I want to do is just talk about a little bit the importance of objects in storytelling. And obviously, you'll have heard that Grandpa Jazz touches on a few different themes, and he's a great storyteller. But a lot of his stories are inspired by the objects that Frank finds. And if you're interested in creative writing and writing your own stories, objects and using things can be a really good way of kind of sparking the imagination. So I'm going to share with you something that's here next to me, which is a great big blue suitcase, Grandpa Jazz's suitcase. And in the suitcase, I've got some things to show you which come from the story. Um, so this is a piece of volcanic rock. It's got lots of tiny holes in it, and nowadays people use this as a like a pumice stone to rub away dead skin off their feet, which is a bit gross, but that's where it comes from. It's kind of it's volcanic rock, and it's got lots of holes in it because it's kind of bubbled up from the earth, and it's very light as well. That's really interesting about that. um, so yeah, so obviously in the story, Frank finds that in Grandpa Jazz's suitcase, and that sparks the story about when he used to go exploring volcano craters, um, whilst when he was a boy. Um, the the other thing I've got in here, touch on in the book, a little bit scary. Don't be too alarmed. This is an anatomical skull. So this is like the skull that would have been on the doctor's desk in the story. And this is an anatomical skull is the type of skull that a doctor or a medical professional would use to look at the shapes of the bones in the human skull. Um, So this is my little friend who sits on my desk a lot of the time now, and his name is Henri. Henri likes to sit with me, and I tell him stories, and sometimes he inspires me. And then what else have I got in here? I've also got Jazz's name badge from the story. Do you remember when Frank found a piece of clothing that was his uniform, and he had this name badge on his clothing from when he worked in the NHS. So those are a few objects. You might like to choose one of those objects, but what I'm going to ask you to do, and we're going to have a little think about, is how we can use objects to create some stories, because I think it's rather wonderful to think about how objects can have a life of their own. And I wonder what stories they can tell you. Antiques are very old objects, as I'm sure you know, and I wonder how many stories they could tell. So I would just like to introduce a little creative writing exercise that hopefully you'll enjoy having a go at. And here are some questions for you to have a little think about, which might spark some creativity in your own writing. So the first thing I'd like you to do is think about an object which is going to spark a story that you're going to tell. Using objects is a great way to evoke the past, and they can also create central plot themes for a story or a narrative that takes us into the future. Maybe it's an object at home, or that is an object that is a family heirloom. It can be really old, it can be really new. And I want you to take a little bit of time now to do one of three things. Either write a little bit about your object, or you could create a story map if you prefer to do that, or do a picture. So just so I'm just going to go through these questions, and these might spark some creative ideas for you. So first of all, have a think about once you've got your object in your mind. You might want to choose one of my objects, or one of the objects from Grandpa Jazz's stories. But where did your object come from? Was it given to you? Did you find it? Where did you find it, if you found it? Has it been in your family for a long time? And when you're thinking about where your object came from, maybe have a think about, just staying on that top slide for now. Thank you, Amreen. Think about who owned it before you. So if it's not new, if it's an antique, if it's very old, if it's a family heirloom, who owned that object before you? And what's their name? Where do they live? And then I think with those two questions, we've sort of set up a bit of a basis for the story. So we're starting with something, your special object. We know a little bit about where it came from, maybe who owned it before. And if it was owned by somebody before, how has it come to you? Why have you got it? And now we're going to think about a little bit of a plot twist. So I'm going to give you some ideas for a plot twist. What would happen if your object went missing? Has it got lost? Has it been stolen? Has somebody taken it? Did you see somebody take it? And what's the impact that's left behind if it's gone missing? What would happen? Maybe it didn't go missing in your story, but maybe here's another plot twist. Here's another idea for you. What would happen if your object was magic and it came to life? Can you think of what you would do if your object came to life? Would you tell everybody? Would you keep it secret? Would you hide it away? Would you share the secret with somebody close to you? And then finally, might bring us to the end of your little story, your little idea. But once you've finished with your object, maybe you don't want it anymore. Would you pass it on to somebody? Or would you keep it? Is that going to stay with you and stay in your family for a long time? What's going to happen? What's going to happen next? So hopefully I've given you a few ideas there for some creative writing of your own. And like I say, it's amazing to think about how many stories can start with a single thing. Next to me on my desk, I've got a globe. I don't know if you can see here. And I like to keep this on my desk because it makes me think of all the adventures that Grandpa Jazz and Frank might be having traveling the world. But a globe is an amazing object. So I could tell you lots of stories about where this globe came from. It's been in my family for a long time. And it hasn't gone missing, but it lives on our in our office on the desk up here. If it was to go missing, I'd be very upset because we've had it for a long time. But I'll pass this on to my children when they're grown up. So yeah, this is a great object, and I think it has a lot of potential to talk about different stories, just because of what it is. So yeah, so hopefully I've given you some ideas for some stories there and some plot twists. One of my favourite plot twists for objects would be kind of in the magical side of things, but what would happen if it doubled in size or quadrupled in size? What would happen then? What would you do? Who would you tell? How would you hide that from anyone? Brilliant. Okay. Well, thank you for listening. I'd be really interested to hear what you've come up with and what little stories you've come up with. Shall we go on to the did you think of anything, Ambreen? Have you done any creative writing?
I came in to say that I did not know pumice stones came from they were I didn't know they were volcanic rock.
Oh, well, it's rock from the earth. Yeah, it's probably not the lava that bubbles up, which is I think what Grandpa Jazz was saying. He hadn't quite got that right, but it is a natural stone. That's right.
It's amazing.
So in a moment, I'd like to just do a second sort of creative writing, second activity with you. And this is really inspired by the journey that Grandpa Jazz took in the first part of the book. So if I just remind you, obviously Frank and Jazz are off on the plane, and they're going to Mauritius, which is where Jazz comes from. But you'll remember the way that Grandpa Jazz first got to the UK was by ship, and it was a big ship. And I don't know whether you caught, but I explained to Amberine just after I finished reading that this was based or inspired by my dad's own journey to the UK, and that journey on that ship took him a month. So he set sail and arrived in April 1969 to the UK. But it had taken him a whole month to travel from Mauritius round South Africa and all up the west coast of Africa to the UK. So he couldn't bring that much with him. And I wondered if you could have a think about maybe if you were taking a journey, if you were going on a voyage like Grandpa Jazz did, what would you pack in your suitcase? What 3 objects or more objects if you like, but what objects would you bring with you, and why? And maybe on a piece of paper, you can draw the objects on the piece of paper and then write a few sentences underneath for me to explain why you would bring them. They might be things that remind you of home. They might be things that you could do on your journey, books or activities. And they might be things that will be useful when you get to your destination. So perhaps think about the voyage. Are you going on holiday? Are you visiting family in a different country? I would certainly take my hat because wherever I go, I like to protect my head from the sun. So that would definitely be something I would bring. Definitely some books as well because I love reading. And probably a notepad and paper because I also really enjoy writing. So I'd be wanting to make lots of notes about my travels. So I think those would be 3 important things that I would bring. And if I was allowed more objects, I would bring some photographs of my family to remind me of home. So yes, really interested to know what you would bring with you. So I'm just going to give you a few minutes now just to have a think about what would come with you.
I want to know if a pen and a paper would class as one thing or two items.
I think we can allow that as one thing. That's a very good question. I've put three objects there, but feel free to, in the time that you've got, think of as many as would fit in a suitcase. Yeah, so remember that Grandpa Jazz probably had a suitcase on not much bigger than this. So I think you could probably get lots of clothes in there, but what would be the few important things that you would bring with you? Should we give everyone a couple of minutes, Ambreen, and then we'll come back to do our Q&A?
Are we allowed to take digital things? I think I'd take a camera.
A digital camera, yes, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah,
I guess it
I
also
think,
depends on how you travel as well, doesn't it?
yeah. So whether you're traveling by boat or by plane or by car, and I think what you're going to do when you get there as well. Um, and I think a really interesting and again, this might be another creative writing idea actually, was if somebody was to find your suitcase. Imagine if your suitcase went missing. If somebody was to find your suitcase and open your suitcase, what would they learn about you from the objects that you've chosen? Would they be able to find you? Would they be able to come and find you because all of your objects um, are so connected to who you are and the things that you love? They might go, oh, okay, well, they might be set off on a little detective hunt to narrow down who it belongs to. So maybe that's an idea for another story. Somebody finds a suitcase, and then when they open the suitcase, there are some very interesting things inside.
We have, whilst we just give people a moment to just do that, we've had a comment come in. I'm just going to put that one up. And Christina said, I've been thinking of what would happen if my teapot increased in size.
Oh, I think that's a very good one. I think you just have to drink all the tea, Christina.
It's giving me a lot of Alice in Wonderland vibes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I love that. Yeah, and it's a great shout actually, Ambreen, because if you look at a story like Alice in Wonderland, um, that is another story which is very centered around objects, the pocket watch, things that happen in real life. And if you just change one aspect, so change the size of the teapot, change the size of something, you've suddenly got kind of the basis for something very creative, and you've suddenly got the basis of a story, because suddenly everyone's got to now deal with the fact that something's so much bigger and it doesn't fit into normal life. What do you do? So I think sometimes if you're trying to think of sparks and creative writing ideas, start with some very basic things. Start with kind of a very mundane, normal day-to-day life, and just change one thing. So yeah, speed up time, or take one thing out that you really need, make something go missing. Suddenly you've got a mystery.
Then it's no longer
Um,
an ordinary story, is it?
and then it's no longer ordinary, and you've also got something that drives the plot as well, because there are questions. So why has something suddenly increased in size? Will it fit where it's supposed to fit? How is everyone going to get on around the breakfast table with the teapot that's so big on it now? What are we going to have to change on the breakfast table? And then you've got different people's reactions as well, so you can think about characters and how characters will react to certain things. So Christina, when your family come in and see the teapot on the table, what are they going to think that you've done? Are they going to think you've gone absolutely mad and gone out and bought giant teapot? Or are they going to say, oh great, okay, well, where are our giant cups then? Because we all want a big cup of tea now.
Christina said she'd happily drink the tea.
Me too.
I guess it also
Me too.
depends on how big it would grow. Like my first thought was, if it's big enough to put in your garden, you could have like a really weird private pool.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, that is also the basis of a brilliant picture book, I think, Ambreen. Imagine the fun an illustrator would have, if they were drawing a huge teapot swimming pool
I think
with kind of
Christina's got the better idea. She said we can turn it into a hot tub.
or a hot tub. Yeah, I can see people like crawling up the spout and diving in. But that's great, and I think that's like I said to you earlier, really kind of one of the things that I'm always keen to talk about when talking about my picture books is the role of the illustrator. Because and again with objects, when you use objects to spark stories, that's great for an illustrator to be able to draw things and to be able to put things in into the scenes. And I know that Myrna, who illustrated Grandpa Jazz, really enjoyed not only drawing the characters and bringing all the characters to life, but she really enjoyed drawing the objects and creating the objects, particularly the skull. I think I'm sure you'll all agree that she did an amazing job of drawing the skull, and Frank's kind of shocked reaction when his grandpa talks about that. Just remind you, there it is this way. So yeah, I think, you know, when you're thinking about writing stories and trying to develop plot lines and things that happen, that's what I love about things and objects, because not only do they look great, but they've got a past and a story to tell. And when you're thinking about creating picture books, as the writer, you do have to think about the words, but you also have to think about the fact that most of your page in a picture book is going to be picture. And many writers will, you know, will try and give some direction to what that is going to be. But for me, it's really about making sure that there are less words on the page, so that I can give way to the picture doing more. And it's a really magical process as well as a writer when you send off your words. And then, you know, for me, what Myrna really did so beautifully was illustrate the relationship between the grandpa and the grandson. So they have these sort of really knowing looks between the two of them, and a lot of the time in the pictures, they are so this little spread at the back. They're always in the same stance. They kind of look the same, and that all came from sort of Myrna's creative license, really, with the story. Which I love. So, you know, I haven't written in the words Grandpa Jazz and Frank love each other so much. It's really implicit in the story, in the pictures. That's what the pictures have brought, which is so beautiful.
I know a lot of people think, oh, it's picture books, so it's less words, a lot easier. But I personally don't think I would ever be able to do something so like that without wanting to write lots and lots of words. I
That's the
just think it's
difficult
such a
bit.
skill to
Yeah,
have.
it is easier in terms of it sort of in theory takes a bit less time because you're not having to write as many words, but it's very, for me, it's a bit like writing poetry. So I'll start with more words, and every time I go back and edit, I'll try and take out words, so that the words that you're left with are words which drive the plot, drive the narrative, and are rich with meaning, and don't try and do anything that the picture's already doing.
Yeah.
You're not duplicating in that sense. I think that's really important when you sort of, you have to think about it visually. You have to think about the spreads of the book, and you have to think about it visually, and what the illustrator brings. And the challenges of modern day working are that I've the two picture books that I've done, I've never worked alongside the illustrator, which is really sad. And I'm hoping for my next book I will be working more in kind of physical collaboration. But I've been able to connect with a really talented illustrator who lives in Bosnia, actually, but we've never met in person. So there's pros and cons. I think I would love to sit alongside somebody on a really big desk, surrounded by all the objects that make up our story, and work in a really collaborative way. But equally, it's nice to kind of send something off and then be really, really pleasantly surprised when it comes back, because it wasn't necessarily what you were expecting or what you envisaged, and the illustrator has just kind of made things take on a life of their own, which is absolutely the experience that I had with creating this book.
I think it's beautiful how obviously the stories about different cultures, and then you've actually got different people contributing that are from very, very different places,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
just kind of bring
definitely.
into one big picture.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's really wonderful actually that you know the effort in creating this book has come from all corners of the globe, inspired by my dad who came from Mauritius, illustrated by Myrna who lives in Bosnia, um, and yeah, there's other people as well involved. The publishers work very hard to bring all of those elements together, and create something that is going to have a wide appeal, and be really inclusive as well, which is one of the goals of Owlet Press, which is my publisher.
We just had another comment coming in. I think this is so interesting about bringing something along. And Asmia said, I would like to bring them my own memories because I am able to share with them.
Oh, that's lovely. That's amazing. That's a really nice thought. Um, yeah, and I think memory and it really fascinates me as a writer, and kind of what you can remember and how you can put stories together, and in a way was a big inspiration for Grandpa Jazz, because all of his stories are obviously remembered, and they've been told kind of time and time again. So a lot of Grandpa Jazz's stories are inspired by my dad's own stories, and I've grown up listening to them. So since I was a little girl, I've listened to his stories about the dog, the Irish wolfhound called Mickey. That's a real story. Um, the skull on the doctor's desk. All these things were remembered by my dad. So I think, yeah, absolutely agree with that comment. That's incredible, and I think the real gift is being able to kind of pass those memories on, in a way that kind of means something for the next generation. I wonder what she would bring to help her with those memories, whether there would physically be something, or whether she wouldn't need anything at all.
We could have magic in there, couldn't we?
Pardon?
We could have a magic, kind of
Yes,
psychic
yeah,
passing your memories on to whoever's there with you.
yeah, absolutely. Or an object that you look into and you can kind of see the memories. I love that kind of bringing in that kind of magical side of things. Um, that could be really fun, really, really fun.
We do have some questions from before that if we could just move on to the questions, if that's
Of
okay.
course, yeah, I'd be really interested to see anyone's little bits of creative writing, and hopefully that's given you all a few ideas of where to start. Yeah, like I say, just using stories as objects as the basis for your stories. Hopefully that gives you a few ideas.
You've answered this question, but it was something that's been asked was Frank as his grandpa telling him his stories, who was your person?
Oh yeah, so like I've said, it was based on my dad, inspired by my dad, and I think as we go through life, many a time we meet somebody like Grandpa Jazz, somebody that's really good at telling stories, and they're often really good oral storytellers, great orators of our time, that you can sit and listen to, and they just talk and they can light up a room with the stories they tell us. So in many ways, this book is it's an ode to all of those people who are great oral storytellers, and they can just captivate people with their own stories or recounting a story. Um, so for me, that's my dad. But I've also met many others throughout my sort of life and work as well. Um, and it's not, I'm not necessarily like that. I think personally for me, I'm probably the quieter person in a group of people, so I'll sort of sit back and listen. Um, but yeah, clearly I like to write things down. That's kind of my way of doing it and my way of telling the story. But that's interesting as well. Like, if you, perhaps for those of you that are listening, have a think about who your Grandpa Jazz is. Who is it that that is a great storyteller, that whenever they tell you their stories, you just can't help but listen.
I think it's important people who pass on stories are just as seen, because obviously the stories wouldn't live if we didn't have people like yourself actually writing them down to pass on, memorize them like, forever into a storybook or whatever format you put it into.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I don't know about you, but I often find the people that are really good at telling their stories, orally, are not that great at actually putting pen to paper and kind of writing it down. And they tend to be sort of the big characters, but not necessarily the ones who will sit down and do the work behind the scenes. So you absolutely do need the people that are going to do that. Otherwise, everything just gets lost in the sort of I guess, yeah, just the that story, but, yeah, it's a good point.
Ooh, this is quite a important one. Um, how close is Frank's experience of privilege to your own? I know you said you've
Mm.
got little boys that quite don't look that they're mixed race.
Yeah, it's a very good question actually, and it was something that I started to think about in sort of more detail a couple of years ago, because within my own family, um, we've got my dad who's darker skinned, my mum who's white, my brother and I who are, I guess, the same. We sort of look very similar, but my brother and I have had different experiences, of prejudice and conscious bias and racism, which, given that we pretty much look the same, is interesting. Um, and I would say kind of Frank's experience and privilege is very close to my own. Um, I don't feel that throughout my life, in the sort of the way that I lived and the places that I've been, I've knowingly experienced much racism at all. If any, it's certainly not something that I can talk about. Well, I can only ever talk about my experience, but that's what I would say. I've never knowingly experienced something that has caused me harm. Um, However, when I look back retrospectively on certain exchanges or certain things that have happened, um, I do with a sort of a clearer view on things now, have questions about, why certain things might have happened. Um, so I think, yeah, to answer that question, Frank's experience of privilege is very close to my own. It's sort of um, written from me, and I think, again, my children, that's something that I want my children to understand as well, their experience of privilege, because they, my eldest son's got blue eyes. He looks very Caucasian, and I think that is, something that he's obviously going to grow up with, that feeling of not experiencing any kind of unconscious bias, but he needs to understand what is in his family and the varying experiences that we have in our small family.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think it's really, really important. Um, from a young age, we just not overload them with information. We just make them aware that we all exist differently in the
Yeah.
world.
And I think that's what I've tried to do, in a sort of a, I guess, a light way, a light and subtle way with Grandpa Jazz. Is there are just two moments in there where that difference is highlighted. One, obviously, with the segregation on the boat, and then secondly with the way Jazz was treated, when his name was changed. Um, and I think the challenge when you're talking to young children, um, about race, is, in order for them to understand it in detail, you kind of have to teach them about racism, which can be very upsetting. And and it's hard, I think, with different children to kind of pinpoint when is the right moment to do that. Because when young children realise that the experience that some people have, it is traumatic
Yeah,
and
I think
upsetting for
it's
them.
just that preparation, isn't it? And it's not just, I know it's not just preparing that my child might experience racism. It's also my child might be able to step in when someone else is experiencing racism and say, well, actually, that's because children tend to listen to each other a lot more than when an adult is, because obviously they want to be friends with each other and they don't have that concept of actually we're going to hold a grudge for a very long time. Because obviously they're
That's
small and they
right.
get over things quite quickly, don't they? So
Yeah.
if child A is experiencing something and child B steps in and say that's not right, child A is a lot more likely. it's a lot more likely to go in and say, actually, yeah, if so, they're saying it's wrong, so it must be wrong, and I don't want to be ostracized from this group, so I need to correct my behavior, rather than actually, well, this is my opinion, and I'm going to stick to this, whether it's a nice opinion or not.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely right. Agree with that 100%. And I think that's where you can really harness that the magic of children and that innocence, and their openness and willingness to sort of learn and be open-minded and accept things. And the older that gets, the more kind of that unconscious bias kind of grains in, and it's kind of more challenging to unlearn things. But there's no easy way through it at all, and I don't have any answers or advice. It's I can only really talk about my own experience, and having my own children, having walked that path with them as well. And it's different for every person and for every child. There is a different experience. So I think for parents and carers and teachers, and all we can ask is that we're open-minded and we listen. And I think that's the really wonderful thing about picture books, and certainly diverse picture books, that so much of this starts with empathy, so much of understanding, and kind of doing the right thing starts with empathy and walking somebody else's path. And that's what picture books can do so wonderfully, is to show you a world that maybe is not your own world, to help you walk a path that you would not have traditionally walked, to live it, to live a sort of a moment in those characters' shoes. And I honestly do think that the route towards a better society is through empathy, and the role that picture books have in that is huge.
I totally agree with you on that. Now that you've got your holiday hat on, I think this next question is very suitable. Have you actually ever visited Mauritius?
Um, so when I was a child, I first went to Mauritius when I was about 6 months old, I think. And then I used to go as a child on holiday quite often. And it was really wonderful for me because we have lots of family there. So my dad was one of 4 children, and his eldest brother had 8 kids of his own, and they've each got their own families, 4 girls and 4 boys, who have now each got their own families. So there's lots of family homes all over the island. There's always open arms and lots of food being served. So it's a really wonderful and welcoming environment, for me to go to. And I haven't taken my children there yet, but my goal is within the next sort of couple of years to take them so they can experience it.
That would be awesome. It'd be your own little ending twist to, like how in the book, obviously Frank goes with his grandpa. Now it'll be your
Yeah,
turn with your ones.
absolutely. And I think as soon as they go there and realize what it's like, and kind of see the places where he grew up, and kind of see the places where his stories come to life, where they're real, that will really make it real for them. So I can't wait to take them.
Staying on the topic of traveling, I know that you worked in the Middle East, but there's a question that's how many places have you traveled?
Oh, that's a really good question. Oh, I would let's have a think. So I didn't work in the Middle East, actually. I did live in the Middle East, for most of my primary schooling. So when we were two, well, not when we were two, when I was two, we we were all two. Um, when I was two, we left the UK. My parents had contracts in Saudi Arabia, so I actually did all of my primary school, in Saudi Arabia, which was a really fantastic experience to understand and learn different cultures, because not only were we living in an Arabic culture, but there were lots of expats from all over the world. So I got to meet and understand, and kind of learn about different cultures in a really exciting way. Um, so I've traveled to different places in South Africa, North America. So yeah, I've probably traveled in the Far East. Yeah, traveled to quite a few places. The one place that I've never been though is South America,
Mhm.
in terms of continents, which I would love to go to. Um, so that's definitely on the bucket list.
Anywhere specific or?
Definitely, definitely Brazil. there's so much to see in Brazil that I would love to see, and Chile as well, Costa Rica.
It's all places with really nice climate, isn't it, compared to the British weather?
Yeah, there's a theme here, isn't there? Me sitting in home is definitely a thing. But yes, that's also definitely want to get there at some point.
Following on from the traveling question, and you've mentioned that obviously you've been in the Middle East. What was your experience living in the Middle East amongst some really rich cultures? Because obviously you said there were expats, there were obviously the actual culture of the actual country. So it's quite a mingle, wasn't it, of different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you live in a place like Saudi Arabia, you're very often in an expat community. Back then when I lived there, and to a point now, Saudi Arabia is not a free country. There's certain things you can and can't do, certain laws that you obviously need to abide by that are very, very different to the Western world. So women can drive there now, but when I was there, they couldn't. So that affected our life quite a lot, obviously, because my dad used to have to drive us everywhere. So there were things like that were very different in terms of the way we lived compared to had we been in the UK. And that's why you sort of live in a sort of a sort of, I guess, what you would call a more closed community. It did mean that we met people who'd come to work there from the States, from the Far East, um, from various countries in Europe. So that was a really rich experience. And in terms of living among really rich cultures, I think again, Saudi Arabia is very interesting because it is a very rich country. When you think about kind of what their main export is, they're exporting oil, and they're kind of investing in tourism at the moment now. So it is a very rich country, but it does rely on kind of the sort of labor and the workforce from many other countries around the world. So there is a huge dichotomy there between, to put it, very bluntly, in a very simple way. So it was very eye-opening to kind of see certain things, as a child, specifically, as a child. One of the great things to do would be to go out to some of the souks and kind of the gold markets, of a weekend, because that was just a vibrant, wonderful experience. And that was where I kind of felt like I probably got the most authentic feel of the culture, because otherwise you're kind of living in a closed expat community, and you've got a nice swimming pool but not much else. And my school, of course, was um, a sort of a national curriculum, like a UK school there. So we did have Arabic lessons, which I was really pleased to have. So we had an amazing Arabic teacher, who was definitely a Grandpa Jazz character, a real storyteller. We would often go to his lessons, and he would just tell us stories all for the whole lesson. But I was lucky enough to kind of pick up the Arabic basics, which I think was a really important thing for the school to do. So I'm really grateful that they did that.
I know the viewers are going to say every time I'm on, I always bring food up. I know food obviously is a massive part of culture. So I'm guessing with the places that you've traveled, you must have had like a lot of access to so many different foods and
Well, I mean, I'll talk a little bit about Mauritian food. So Mauritian culture is a really interesting melting pot of culture. So immigrants came to Mauritius from India, from China, from various countries in Africa. So there are lots of different kind of heritages, lots of different races in Mauritius, but everybody calls themselves Mauritian. So you have influence of cooking from kind of Chinese culture. You have lots of Indian influences. Um, so the food there's is kind of curries, biryanis. There's kind of these sort of fried snacks that they call gajak, which are just incredible. Like the street food there is amazing. I find that the Mauritian cuisine is a little bit milder. than some kind of African and Indian sort of heavily spiced foods. It's kind of milder and a bit more fresher, based with more like tomato based things, salad based things. But yeah, it's just incredible, and I absolutely love it. And my dad is a really good cook as well. So we've always had that Mauritian food in our life, which I'm so grateful for, because it is amazing. And anyone that tries it just loves Mauritian food. And I think, in fact, a couple of years ago, um, a Mauritian lady, and I'm so annoyed, I can't remember her name. One master chef cooking basically all of the main dishes from Mauritian cuisine.
Wow.
And I think she wrote a book. Her name will come to me at the end of it, I'm sure. So she's got a book that's out there, and I bought that book, and it was absolutely spot on in terms of all the dishes that we grew up eating.
I think food is a lot like storytelling, that unless it's passed on, it will just disappear, kind of thing. And I think it's such an important part of culture, just to keep going and learn from obviously our elders, so that we can pass it on to our children.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. And it's my out of the two of us, my brother is the really good cook. So he can now cook all of those Mauritian dishes, and he does them really well.
I know obviously because we've been in so many different cultures, and this, just like Grandpa Jazz, is more obviously part of your heritage. Do you think you'll be writing picture books that are centered around your experiences in other different cultures, say when you've been traveling or living there?
Yeah, I would love to. I would absolutely love to. And I think writing about different parts of the world and kind of contrasting it with where we live, here in the UK, I think that's very useful for children, because I think it gives you a sense of, well, it gives you as a reader a sense of there's a bigger world out there. There's not just kind of my four walls, or kind of where I go to school, or where I go to work. Um, because I think sometimes we can forget that there is so much more going. I keep hitting the globe, but this is what I'm talking about. There is so much more going on in the world out there. Channels that we watch, and the stuff that you see on social media is all it's all tailored to kind of show you more of what it thinks you want to know about, which means you can very rarely get surprised by things, an amazing story in the Far East that you didn't know was going on. Or I just feel like it's a great way of just opening up our eyes to uncurated content that's typically curated through the channels that we follow. So I think for children that's so important, just to give them a sense of, particularly as very young children, just to give them a sense of there's a much bigger world out there. And I've had those questions come through from my own children, as they've kind of my eldest is in reception now, and he's kind of asking me like, oh, so, and he wants to know like the context of where our hometown is versus England versus the world. Like, you can see the little cogs working. And I think the sooner around that, and kind of how big the world is, and where they fit in it, um, I think that's just, yeah, I think that's just wonderful for them to understand.
Thank you so much for that. I can't believe it's already near the end. I didn't realize how fast time has passed.
It has, yes, amazing, gosh.
I want to say thank you so much for coming on today and for sharing your book, and the little activity and all your stories. It's been an absolute pleasure. Can you just stay on screen just for a while whilst I just give out a bit of information,
Of
and then
course,
we'll do
yeah,
our goodbyes?
lovely. And it was lovely to be here. So thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, everyone.
So if anyone wants to follow Tara does have a Instagram. I'll just put it up. It's Tarah L Gear. And you can just put it into Instagram and you can just follow her there. That's her Instagram following. Next week, we will be having Phil Earle on the 23rd, and he'll be introducing his eagerly anticipated new novel, While the Storm Rages. So don't forget to tune in next week on Thursday. We'll have that. Thank you so much again, Tara. It's been an absolute pleasure. And we'll
Thank
see
you
you
for
all
having
next
me.
week.
Bye.
Bye.